Hi and welcome to Faux Food Creations. I'm Emily and today I'm going to show you how to make this cheese board with 5 different cheeses as well as some fake crackers. For the Swiss cheese, we'll start with a large porous sponge, and you're going to want to put a generous coat of Mod Podge on top of this sponge, covering all the surface area so that it doesn't absorb any of the material that we're going to be putting on in a few minutes. While that's drying, you're going to mix some clear caulking with some acrylic paint. The color we're going for is like a very pale yellow, so I started off with this color called Vanilla Ice Cream, but you could use any cream color, and then I'm adding in some yellow. And then you'll just mix this together. It's a little bit difficult to mix, so you'll have to work with it a little bit. Once it's well applied, you can start applying it to the sponge, and you'll want to make sure to get it down into all the holes. You don't necessarily want to fill them in, but you want to make sure that they are covered in the material. It is okay if a couple of the holes get filled in because it just kind of adds a more realistic texture. Halfway through, I decided that I did want to cut a slice out of it, so I just took some scissors and chopped it out. And then I just continued applying the mixture all over. Moving on to the blue cheese, we're going to be using the same type of sponge, and you'll just want to cut this into kind of jagged sections. It's meant to be crumbly, so anything that you can do to kind of rough it up is perfect. Here you can see I'm just kind of squeezing it and taking sections out at random. Next, you'll want to mix together a very dark green and a blue acrylic paint. Then you'll just apply that into all the little crevices on the sponge. And you don't need to coat this sponge in the Mod Podge like you did the last sponge because we're using a different material, so it doesn't matter if it gets as absorbed into it. Next, you'll mix some all-purpose crack filler with some cream paint. And then once you have your mixture, you'll start applying it to the sponge in a stippling motion, and you want this to be textured, so don't be afraid to kind of glob it on there and stipple it around. And while this is still wet, you can go in back with that green color and just kind of add a little bit more here and there wherever you see fit. And that's it for your blue cheese. For the brie, you'll start off with about a fist-sized ball of Model Magic, and to make the slice, you're going to put your finger into it and then kind of make this triangle shape within the ball. And then you'll push it down, and then you'll just keep shaping it until you feel like it's the perfect brie shape. If you want to make that slice a little bit more prominent, you can use something hard to kind of push the edges out a little bit. Brie is usually a little bit textured on the top from the packaging that it comes in, so if you want to add that texture, you can take a piece of wax paper and crinkle it up and kind of make it into a fan pattern, and then you can press that into the top of the brie to transfer that pattern. Next, you'll want to mix a light yellow color, and then you'll paint that onto the inside of the slice. I somehow lost the footage of painting the outside, but I just used that cream color that I used earlier and coated the outside. Here you can get a look at the colors that I used, and then on the inside I used a glossy Mod Podge, and on the outside I used a matte. The process of making the gouda is very similar to making the brie, but we're making a different shape. So we're starting with a ball of Model Magic and then pressing on the sides to flatten them out, and then we're forming kind of a wedge shape. You'll want to leave the part of the cheese that's opposite from the corner around it so that it looks like it's been cut out of a wheel of cheese. Once you're happy with your shape and you've let it dry, you'll use a light yellow color, a little bit yellower than the brie color that we used previously, and you'll just paint the 2 flat sides of the wedge. Make sure to leave a little bit of an edge on each side so that you can see that the rind goes around it a little bit. And then mix up a very bright red color and then use that to paint the color of the rind. And because of the texture of this cheese, I painted the whole thing with a glossy Mod Podge afterwards. For the cheddar, I recommend using this kind of cube-shaped sponge as a base, but you could also just make a cube out of Model Magic and let that dry. For this method, I'm rolling out a thin sheet of Model Magic, and I want it to be big enough to cover this cube, and then I'm going to lay it over it, kind of like fondant. And then you kind of just have to work with it until everything is covered. The benefit of having the sponge underneath there is that it keeps its shape, so the cube will stay nice and crisp the entire time, but like I said, you do just have to work with this until everything is covered. And then once your cube is dry, you can move on to painting it. I used these 2 colors to make a very sharp cheddar color. Then you can just coat everything in your paint, and then I would recommend going over this with a glossy Mod Podge. If you're interested in making cheese slices of the cheddar as well, you can cut out a couple rectangles from a thin piece of styrofoam and then just cover that in the same color. And then finally for the crackers, you'll want to use some air dry clay, and then you'll smush that between 2 pieces of wax paper and then roll it out really thin. Once you get to about this thickness, you should be pretty much ready. And then I'm using the top of a pan lid to cut out circles, but you can use anything that's kind of relatively the size that you're looking for. And then you can use a toothpick or a clay tool or anything that you have that's kind of pointy to create little dots in the clay to make the holes in the cracker. And then once your crackers are dry, you'll want to mix a base color. These are the colors that I use to make this kind of yellowy tan color for the base. Let that dry and then mix up a bit of a darker color that can kind of emulate the color of the toasted bits of a cracker. You can paint a light layer on the edge and then with a dry brush go in and kind of smudge that out. Just creates a little bit more dimension to the cracker.